Hey guys, how you doing? This is Mike McCormick again with Advanced Criminology in Owings Mills, Maryland. This is part two. I promised you part two investigation, Freddie Gray, in terms of the evidence in this case that virtually the public really never paid attention to. Some of it was never reported, and it, as a result of the case not being investigated properly by the police department and the state's attorney's office together, we've come away with a different take on the case, which would have led to two arrests, and those arrests would have been Officer Garrett Miller as well as Officer Edward Nero. So I'm going to pick it up because in the last video I did promise to show you some photos of the location in the courtyard where the CCTV camera 3 had been located, and which also showed Freddie Gray on his back with his hands up and Officer Miller stomping on Freddie Gray at that time. And it also depicted Officer Edward Nero approximately 60 feet north of where this activity was taking place. He was on his bicycle at that time. We are going to show you that, but I just want, in this particular video, I think what I'm going to go to, I'm kind of setting this whole thing up so it flows logically. As I said before in the last video, I think you guys got a good understanding of what I was talking about in that first video. So we're moving on in this video to talk about the medical examiner's office. And if there's time allotted, I'll go into the courtyard stuff. Okay, so one of the first things we need to talk about, in any homicide investigation, the medical examiner is always there to have to do an autopsy of the deceased. And that autopsy, probably in 99% of the times, particularly in criminal cases, that autopsy is dependent on several things, and I'm going to read what those several things are according to the ME's report in this particular case dealing with Freddie Gray. I'll take my glasses off is because I can read. I don't have my reading glasses. These are just my viewing glasses. So one of the things that this report, in this particular report, and I'll give you the authors of the report. One is Carol H. Allen, MD, who's the assistant medical examiner. And it's also David R. Fowler, MD, who's Chief Medical Examiner. And this is signed 4/32/2015. So we all know that Freddie Gray died on the 12th. He was arrested on the 12th and died on the 17th. Okay, so shortly thereafter, his autopsy was completed. And here are the things that the medical examiner based their whole opinion on. It says here, the cause and manner of death are based on autopsy findings, review of medical records, and the investigation of the circumstances surrounding the death, including available witness statements, captured scene videos, and examination of the police transport vehicle. By report, the deceased was taken into custody following a police bike and foot pursuit on 4/12/2015. Upon being apprehended, Mr. Gray placed himself on the ground and his hands were cuffed behind his back. You know what? I am so glad that when we go back and look at stuff in the forensic world of investigation, you come up with things and you're able to compare and contrast things. And one of the things that really make this report, part of this report, this initial paragraph here, is that, and I think things that do stand out, because we're going to be able to argue those things very plainly, so you, the viewer, can kind of understand. I might go out there in some medical terminology, and I might go out there in some investigative stuff, but I'm going to make it plain kind of the whole way through. And here we go. It says here, captured video scenes. I just read off several things that the medical examiner uses to make a determination in a collective of several things. One might be better than the other two, or two might be better than the other three of those things that they're going to use to make their final determination in terms of what was the cause and the manner of death. So here we go. I'm going to say this again. Cause and manner of death. Okay. Now, it says here that, and I have my phone, forgive me, let me just go ahead and put this on silent, vibrate. Okay. It says here that there were captured scene videos. The only captured scene videos that the medical examiner had would have been the only videos that the police department had turned over. They never turned over CCTV video camera 3. That was the video camera I told you about in the first video dealing with the Freddie Gray investigation. So she never saw that particular video, medical examiner. It also says here that there would have been investigation of the circumstances, again, investigation of circumstances surrounding the death. She did examine the police transport vehicle, and it says here, including available witness statements. Well, I don't really know what available witness statements she might have had, other than the initial statements given to her by the police department from Officer Garrett Miller. Now, we know what those statements were, and those statements are contradictory based upon the actual video still shot of Freddie Gray laying on his back with his hands up. So I want you guys to understand, how many times have you seen suspects, if they get chased by the police and they give up, lay down on their back first? Even when I was a police officer, I didn't have anybody lay on their back first to give up. They either stand up, put their hands up, turn around, get on their knees, or they lay face down. I don't know too many people that give up laying on their back with their hands up. However, the video camera contradicts that, because that's in plain sight. We know that the ME got a report from the police department because it says here that upon being apprehended, Mr. Gray placed himself on the ground and his hands were cuffed behind what? His back. So if Mr. Gray was already laying flat in a prone position, then it would make sense that he would be cuffed behind his back. But the video is in controversy, because the video shows Mr. Gray laying on his back, not on his stomach. Therein is a problem. Now, because the medical examiner is not even considering whether or not this Mr. Gray was injured during the takedown, because in her mind, according to the report received from the police department, Mr. Gray had complied. Because when you use the words, Mr. Gray placed himself on the ground, that means Mr. Gray complied. And that means Mr. Gray was on his stomach. Because you go from your stomach, you go from the standing up, you place yourself on the ground, on your stomach, and the only way you can be cuffed behind your back is to be on your stomach. And this is what this says. Excuse me. So there, excuse me again. So therein lies, there's a thing in law enforcement, there's a thing in criminal justice, and it goes like this. As crime occurs, police are called to investigate that crime. Reports are written. Reports then are signed off from the police officers, the supervisors. Those reports then, if a person is going to be arrested and charged, those reports then filter and find their ways to the state's attorney's office. Those reports also will be disseminated to a couple other agencies as well. Disseminated, I mean they're going to be handed out, passed out for other agencies' review, including the state's attorney's office. Now, if the officers in the very beginning of their investigation or anyone associated with the investigation starts to fabricate information about a crime, what was the cause of it, the suspected manner that it occurred, anything that is mentioned in that particular police report that is fabricated, it starts at that point and continues to follow a pattern. And that pattern of fabrication gets supported by the state attorney's office and by the court system, and eventually the trier of fact, the judge or jury. Excuse me again. Give me a sec. Okay. So, paperwork is fabricated from the very beginning. Testimonies are fabricated. And those fabrications are supported by supervisors along the way. By the time it gets to the process of being tried in the courtroom, a defendant, in all likelihood, would be found guilty because those fabrications are treated as truths. And because we have entrusted civilians who have become police officers to tell the truth, to make the right decisions, not to lie. And if there is any ambiguities, let those ambiguities be cleared up before those documents reach the state's attorney's office. Because all the state's attorney's office has to go on 99% of the times is what's written in the police officer's report. But what makes this case different is that the state's attorney's office chose to do what they call a lateral investigation, where the state's attorney's office has their own set of investigators that will go out and do interviews, look at the crime scene, look at documents to see if there's any difference in what the police reports are saying. The problem is, in many cases, you have an investigation that was very quick, by the way. From the time that Freddie died, officers were indicted, less than a month later. So if it's already determined by the medical examiner's office that an individual died in a van, not too much investigation is actually going to be taking place that would kind of controvert what has already been put in the police reports. So subsequently, the investigators that the state attorney sent out concluded that everybody was correct. They didn't see anything different because they relied also on the same police reports. Again, and so these lies continue on through the system. Now, let's go back to the report. I just got sidetracked, but I really wanted to explain to you, folks out there who aren't familiar with the criminal justice system and how it works, how the paperwork flow works, and what can happen when things start to get fabricated from the beginning of an arrest all the way to the prosecution stage. So here we go. I stopped by saying that there was a video at the same time showing that Freddie Gray was on his back with his hands up, and he wasn't handcuffed. Okay. This particular statement is supported. This particular statement that Mr. Gray placed himself on the ground is also supported by Officer Garrett Miller. So the ME got this particular information from the report that was submitted by Officer Miller, is what happened. Okay. One of the things that we decided to look at in this particular medical report was where the injuries on Freddie Gray occurred. What did the medical examiner see when the body was transferred from the hospital to the ME's office? And I'll take you to page 2 of that medical report. And what I want you to do is just listen to how many injuries that Freddie Gray sustained to the left side of his body. It is key to keep in mind that anytime I tell you something that I'm telling you is coming from this report, and it's coming from the left side of Freddie Gray's body. And it's coming from the head, the face, and the neck area is where it's coming from. So here we go. And he says, there was no obvious external injuries except for an abrasion skin scrape on the top left shoulder. That's right there, top left shoulder. That was identified on initial examination. A skin scrape, which means that his skin was scraped off. Now, Mr. Gray was wearing a shirt that day, a black shirt. We've seen the video. So the question would be, how did this skin scrape get there? That's the first question you ask. The next thing that they point out as being on the left side of the body was a left vertebral artery injury. Okay, that's dealing with arteries coming from the neck down in this area here, your shoulder area. This is all arterial stuff right there. That's arterial. Then they did an MRI on Mr. Gray. Give me a second again. They did an MRI on Mr. Gray and revealed a tiny left intraventricular hemorrhage near the intersection of his spinal cord. And there was a rupture of multiple stabilizing ligaments at the level of C4 and C5. C4 and C5 happen to be different spinal, right in the back of your neck here, just below the cerebellum there's C4 and C5. Okay. Now, let's get back to the left stuff. There was an abrasion on his left temple. It's your temple, abrasion right there. Excuse me again. Abrasion on the left temple. We need to know how that got there. It's abrasions. There was a small healing abrasion on the left cheekbone. Left cheekbone. That's my cheek right there. Go back there. Left cheekbone. There on the left side of the back of the head, just superior to the neck region, there was a scalp hemorrhaging. There was also hemorrhaging in the left scapula, what they call the right posterior inferior costal margin. That's here, down this area here, left scapula. Okay. Let's continue on. Further, this is the most important thing I'm going to tell you about this whole particular medical examiner's report. Further, and the ME confirms this, the most significant impact to the head and the impact consistent with the neck injury is on the lower, guess what? Left lower back area of the head. She also says that it is not consistent with the injury in a prone position. This is important when she says it is not consistent with an injury in this prone position. And it makes sense, ladies and gentlemen. It makes sense. If you're laying straight forward, down, flat, face forward, and the injury is on the left, you couldn't sustain that injury unless your body was tilted to the left in some way. Left in some way. You couldn't get it from just laying down in a prone position, is what she's saying. But it happens to be the most significant injury is on the lower back area of the head. Now, what that's saying is saying at some point, Mr. Gray was not always laying flat on his stomach. At some point, Mr. Gray was either to the left or maybe could have been on his back. Well, we know he could have been on his back because the picture shows him laying on his back, is what it does. But when you have so many injuries to the left side of the body, you often wonder, because I'm going to take you back to the van. And when I take you back to the van, please use common sense to understand what I'm talking about. We're going to go to the van right here, right now. This is a Baltimore City Police van, and this particular van is used really throughout the country. Mr. Gray was loaded in this side right here. That's the side he was loaded in on. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, there's also a bench that sits right here. If you're loaded in on the left side of this particular van, what side would your body be facing if once you sat down? Well, your left side of your body is going to be facing the doors when they shut. Your right side of the body is going to be facing the driver's compartment. Am I correct? Sure I am. Now, in this particular van, clearly there are no protrusions of bolts, no protrusions of screws, or anything. These vans are designed so that no one can get snagged on anything if the van stops abruptly, whatever the case may be. These are not designed like that. Everything is flattened out. However, the ME is supporting the theory that Mr. Gray was actually hurt prior to getting into the van. And we'll get back to this van in a second. Okay. Remember when I told you that the State's Attorney's Office, once the ME had concluded that this event with Mr. Grace died was in the van? Well, one of the things I didn't share with you in the first video, I'm sharing with you now, is that during the investigation by Baltimore City Police Department and the Assistant State's and the State's Attorney's Department, it was never discovered, never determined that that van that Officer Goodson was operating that day was ever operating erratically. For 40 some odd minutes, that van drove around. In all the areas that he drove in the Western District, no one ever came forward throughout the whole investigation to say that they saw that van stopping and starting, turning erratically. No one ever came forward. So the problem I have with that, knowing the area as I do, that to do the kind of damage that was done to Freddie Gray, people would have certainly saw that particular van that morning stopping and starting. You might even heard skid marks. No one ever came forward to say anything of that nature. No one. Nobody came forward. And so I just wanted to get into that part of the medical examiner's report because she describes so many injuries to the left side of Mr. Gray's body. And she does talk briefly about if a vehicle was stopping and starting, that in a prone position, if he was laying flat, she says if he was laying flat and he was handcuffed, which he was once he got into the van, it would have been really, really hard for him to sustain injuries, that most critical injuries to the lower C4 and C5 region of his neck. It would have been very difficult, as she pointed out, because the injury happened on the back part of his neck on the left side, based upon the width of the seat of the van and based upon where the wall is located in that van, which is about 18 inches to 23 inches, somewhere around there. Even if you look at my shoulder span here, from here to here, it is about 18 inches, maybe 20 inches. So what she was saying is that once he was wedged in on face down, it had been very difficult for him to do any movements of such. So she's supporting, actually, she's supporting the theories that we have espoused since the beginning of the first video, that Freddie Gray was severely damaged and hurt by being stomped by the officer. And this is so important because guess what? I mentioned this in the very beginning of the first video. Had the first scene where he was taken down at, had that been treated as a crime scene, the crime lab would have been called. The investigation would have took a different turn at that point. There'd have been probably, we don't know what kind of evidence would have been covered from that particular area. The officer's clothes would have been confiscated. Particularly the boots would have been confiscated because the boots have what on the bottoms? Tread. And if you know anything about impressions and forensic evidence, all treaded footwear leaves some type of marks based upon the pressure used from an individual, whether it's when you're walking on dirt, ground, or whatever. And also, if you're being stomped to death, there's going to be some type of form of treading. Not only treading, but trace evidence of dirt and other matter would be on that particular individual's face. The problem is, though, is that they never look for that because these officers were never treated as suspects in the beginning of this case as people who would have taken him down and stomped him to death. That was never, no one ever decided to look in that direction. So vital evidence was lost in this particular case at that first location. Now remember, when I took you back and I showed you screenshots of actually these were actual pictures that we took on scene where the yellow cones were, we saw that that particular area was an area that was already filled with a bunch of dirt. We know that because there you go. It's dirt. That's all that's there. There was leaves there. We just scraped it back, but there was dirt there. And now keep in mind, now you see leaves here. On April 12th, 2015, it's not fall. It's not fall at all. It's spring. So leaves weren't even there. The trees were bare during this particular case. That's why the CCTV TV camera number 3 had a clear shot that day on a sunny day that it was, because there were no leaves on any trees at all. However, getting back to this crime scene here, had Freddie Gray had this area been treated as a crime scene, the crime scene technicians certainly could have come out and seen foot impressions, not only on the ground here, but also on the sidewalk, where we actually believe and we see the officer standing up on the concrete partition right here, standing right there. Okay, so that puts the officer where? If you get that kind of evidence, where does that put that officer? That officer cannot refute that he wasn't there, because the evidence puts him there. The dirt particles put him there. If you confiscate the boots, if you do an analysis on the boots and the dirt from that location, it puts the officer there. Even if we didn't have the film, even if he didn't have the film, and all we had was the officer's testimony that this is where he took him down at, it still would put him there, because that dirt's going to match the dirt on the bottom of that officer's foot. But this didn't happen in this particular case. So I just thought I'd bring that up to you about certain things that just didn't happen in this particular case. That if this had been a regular shooting one day in the same courtyard, the crime lab would have been called out. They would have had yellow tape everywhere, and they would have started processing this scene as a homicide scene and started collecting all kinds of evidence and trace evidence to be used against a particular suspect to determine who a suspect might be, and later on in a court proceeding. But that just didn't happen in Freddie Gray's case. Let me do one more thing here, and then I'm going to stop the video, and then I'll be putting together part of video 3. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with this, though. Hold on just a second here. I keep talking about the video 3, and I keep talking about what I'm going to show you, and it's like, you know, I'm leading you up to something, which I am. And here we go. That's a still shot, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to bring it closer and closer and closer. I want you to pay attention to the left side, and you'll see there's a person standing right here. Excuse me. person standing right there. That's an individual. That individual is Officer Garrett Miller, and he's wearing a jacket. Actually, the jacket is yellow. However, because of the sunlight and the camera angle, it makes the jacket look purple. But if you know what? You look close at this, and you really don't have to look that close, but I want you to. I'm going to try to bring it real close to you. If you take a look right here on the ground, can you see a person's arms up against that concrete wall, up in the air? Can you see that silhouette of a person there with their legs sprawled out? I hope you can see that. Okay, that's seen with the naked eye. I blew it up, but on further review, if we play the video faster, you would see that not only is that person's hands up in the air, that person is not handcuffed as well, because his arms start moving up and down, back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to get into this a little bit more. I have more pictures from the courtyard that I want to show you, just to give you a better viewpoint of what's going on in this particular courtyard. But one thing that stands out in this courtyard, and you would have to agree, where are the people? Where's everyone else? There is nobody else, at least none to what you can see. But I know there happens to be somebody, but he's not in the courtyard, but he's in the background where this tree is at right here. This tree. Right here where my finger is a bicycle. Okay, behind the tree directly is Officer Edward Nero on a bike. Okay, that's who that is back there. So it goes back to what I said from the very beginning, that there was no one in the courtyard but two people. The two videos that shot on Pressman Street, this is Pressman Street that runs along here, back and forth. Those videos are on Pressman Street. So those videos also captured Officer Nero in this area right here. So they put him there at the same timestamp that this officer is in the courtyard with Freddie Gray laying on his back. Again, the ME confirmed one thing's for sure, and the statement is this. She said, according to the police report, that Freddie Gray gave up. And he gave up, and he laid down on his stomach and put his hands behind his back. Well, do you see Freddie Gray's hands behind his back? I certainly don't. I want to thank you for listening in on this video number 2. I'm working on video number 3. I'm trying to get a little bit more organized in terms of the flow of information so that it all makes sense to you. But as you look at this video, as I said before, it's not hard to figure out. There's a black silhouette laying on the ground right there with their arms up. And just so we can keep everything referred back to where we are, I'm going to slide this in. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, do you see that? You see that concrete wall? It's the same concrete wall that Freddie Gray has his arms on up there. Same one. No different. Okay, guys, thanks.